The enemy in this war, the enemy has been racially defined. Not by accident, the drug war has been waged almost exclusively in poor communities of color.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 21 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. The president has left Israel after 3 days of intensive buttering up of the apartheid regime. As Israeli writer Chaim Shalev noted, there wasn't one Israeli button that Obama didn't push during his speech and throughout his entire visit. From Holocaust to redemption, anxiety to bravery, victimhood to victory, ancient rights to startup nation. He embraced Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, complimented his wife, and adopted his children, and commemorated his hero brother, all in an effort to wipe the slate clean and start anew. The president also echoed the Israeli demand that Hezbollah be declared a terrorist organization, and as he left, got Turkey to drop its demand for an end of the siege of Gaza before Turkey would restore normal relations with Israel. When Obama came to Ramallah on the West Bank on the 21st, several hundred protesters came as near as they could to the Abbas compound. They didn't come to appeal to the U.S. president. They shouted Obama out of Palestine. We'll have coverage of another protest, that of Palestinians who used Obama's visit as an opportunity to try to build a tent town at Bab al-Shams on land that the covetous Israeli government calls E1.
Where are you from? London. London? صورنا على راسي كاسترة. Thank you.
You were in Bab al-Shams there.
Yeah.
Can you explain what this is about this morning?
About this city. Now we were making again like a new Bab al-Shams here. And it's very close. You can see it was there in the other mountain. The Bab al-Shams This was 2 months ago. And we're making this and we're putting posters for Obama. It's like, Obama, you are on the warring side of the history. Obama, you know, like to get like and to.
He's arriving in Israel today.
He arriving in Israel today, and tomorrow he will be coming in Ramallah, and we did this, like people who did this, to show that about the settlement Israeli, about to open the gate to talk about the Israeli illegal settlements,
Yeah,
and they become more and more in the West Bank here.
yeah. You stayed a few nights in the camp yourself before the Israeli army came in and the
Yeah.
occupation forces dismantled it.
Yeah, it was 2 months ago. We stayed like many people, many activists, Palestinian activists, international. They stayed like 3 months in the other mountain. We stayed 3 days by day and night, and it was very cold there. But we stayed, and then the Israeli army surround the mountain, and then arrested all the people there, and they sent them back. And then after 2 days, they demolition the Papi Shams. And here you can see the settlements near us is called Ma'ali Adumim, and it's one of the big Israeli settlements here. And then it's like, you can see the Israeli Ma'ali Adumim, the Israeli street, and the flag right there.
Well, if they expand that settlement into the Jordan Valley or to Jericho, I mean, the West Bank is completely cut in half, haven't they?
Yeah,
Yeah,
which is like, it's like, and this they want to make it, I think, more settlements here. That's why we do like the people doing like another Babi Shams here to stop them, like, because it's all this area is called Iwan, where we built last time, where was building the Babi Shams, and it was in Iwan, and here another mountain is like, it's also about Iwan.
On the same day that Obama demanded that Hezbollah be treated as a terrorist group, a columnist for a Lebanese newspaper, the Daily Star, spoke at CCSU. TSVN asked him how Hezbollah was viewed in Lebanon. And this is his answer.
Hezbollah is viewed in the region in a variety of ways. I think most people in the region, the Arab world and the Arab Islamic world, Iran, Turkey, etc., most people have a respect for Hezbollah, for what its ability to achieve, and that is in three predominant areas going back to the 1960s. A massive self-help picking up from the shoelaces effort to get the Shiites of Lebanon transformed from being treated like African Americans were treated in the 1940s, mistreated, to the point where they're the strongest group in Lebanon now and respected all around the region. That's one thing they did. The second thing they did is they effectively helped to push the Israeli occupation out of South Lebanon and provided kind of mutual deterrence now with Israel. And Israel is going to be much more careful about attacking Lebanon, and Hezbollah is much more careful about attacking Israel, because both sides know there's going to be massive suffering if they do another war. And the third thing that Hezbollah has done is to provide a model of response to your own community's social and political and economic needs in terms of social services, health care, employment, et cetera, practical things. And so they have huge respect among many people in the region, but there's a lot of people who are very critical of them, including many Lebanese, because they think they're operating as a power in a state within a state with this huge arsenal. And many Lebanese don't like that. I'd say about half the Lebanese are critical of Hezbollah, because every once in a while it creates a war with Israel, and Lebanon gets damaged very badly. And many people think that Hezbollah is a stalking horse for Iran, and it's just an instrument of Iranian foreign policy, which I don't agree with. But many people are critical of Hezbollah, but they respect it at the same time. So it's a very mixed situation. And I think Hezbollah needs to be analyzed with accuracy, clarity, and nuance. And none of those three have ever been part of the American government's analytical toolkit to analyze Hezbollah or Hamas, unfortunately, I think. They've simply taken the Israeli line for the most part. Hamas is a terrorist organization, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, because they fight Israel and they fire missiles at Israel, and there's a war between Hamas and Hezbollah and Israel. And people only will criticize what Hezbollah does to Israelis without looking at what Israel does in terms of the siege of Gaza and the attacks in Lebanon, et cetera, et cetera. So if people are not prepared politically and analytically, morally and conceptually and intellectually, to say there's a war between Hezbollah and Israel. And if you're going to look at these two people, you have to analyze them in the context of a war. And in the context of war, both people do terrible things to each other, including terrorist acts. So Hezbollah does acts that can be classified as terrorism, but so does the Israeli army.
More of Khoury's analysis on future programs. Before we leave the Middle East, I want to urge you to listen to an interview I did with Saudi Arabian activist Ali Al-Ahmed about the executions of 7 people in Saudi Arabia and the world's relative silence about it. It's pretty eye-opening about the Saudi justice system, about the way countries kowtow to the regime, and about the unknown discrimination in Saudi Arabia against its black citizens. Just go to our website, thestruggle.org, to find the interview. Now more of Michelle Alexander's talk at the Yale Divinity School. You know, she's the author of The New Jim Crow. In this part of her speech, she talks about how the so-called war on drugs turned into a roundup of black citizens, and how absolutely hard it is for a person who's let out of jail to find a decent job and a home.
As I describe in some detail in my book, the collapse of inner city communities and the rising crime rates and desperation occurred at precisely the same moment that a backlash against the civil rights movement was brewing, creating the perfect storm. I will not detail here all the politics that gave rise to mass incarceration. Suffice it to say that politicians of both political parties have exploited our nation's racial divisions and anxieties for political gain, and more than a few black politicians joined the Get Tough bandwagon out of desperation to deal with the real problems of crime and violence occurring in their communities. But as we've seen over the years, time and time again, that when poor communities of color ask for good schools, they don't get them. When they ask for jobs or economic investment, they don't get that either. The one thing that poor folks of color ask for and get are police and prisons. And we got way more than we bargained for. Today, children in these communities are now shuttled from decrepit, underfunded schools to very well-funded, high-tech prisons. A new industry has been born, a prison industrial complex that has found a new way to profit from black bodies and to blame them once again for their own plight. And now we stand back and we feign shock and horror as these communities that have been abandoned, where work has disappeared, where the schools have been allowed to fail, and where a war, a literal war, has been declared, we stand back and wonder, why the violence? Why can't these people get it together? Why are they cycling in and out of jail? What's wrong with them? I think the deeper, more pressing question is, what is wrong with us? Today, I find that when I tell people that I now believe that mass incarceration is like a new Jim Crow or a new caste system, people react with shocked disbelief. They say, well, how can you say that? How can you say that? Just look at Barack Obama. Look at Oprah Winfrey. Look at Colin Powell. Look at Condoleezza Rice. The list just goes on of successful black people who've achieved great wealth, fame, or fortune as examples of why nothing like a caste system could possibly exist in the United States. They say, our criminal justice system isn't a system of racial control, it's a system of crime control. If black folks would just stop running around committing so many crimes, we wouldn't have to worry about being locked up and then stripped of their basic civil and human rights. But therein lies the greatest myth about mass incarceration, that it's been driven simply by crime and crime rates. It's just not true. Our prison population more than quintupled in a 30-year period of time. They're not doubled or tripled, quintupled. We went from a prison population of about 300,000 to now an incarcerated population of well over 2 million, giving us the highest rate of incarceration in the world. But during those 30 years, crime rates fluctuated. They went up, went down, went back up again, went down again, and today, as bad as crime rates are in many parts of the country, crime rates nationally are at historical lows. But incarceration rates have consistently soared. Most criminologists and sociologists today will acknowledge that crime rates and incarceration rates in the United States have moved independently of one another. Incarceration rates, especially black incarceration rates, have soared regardless of whether crime was going up or going down in any given community or the nation as a whole. So what explains the birth of a penal system unprecedented in world history? Not crime or crime rates? Well, it's the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, that wave of punitiveness that washed over the United States. Drug convictions alone, just drug convictions, accounted for more than 2/3 of the increase in the federal prison system and more than half of the increase in the state prison system between 1985 and 2000, the period of our prison system's most dramatic expansion. For me, what brings it in sharp relief is to consider there are more people in prisons and jails today just for drug offenses than were incarcerated for all reasons in 1980. Now, most Americans violate drug laws in their lifetime. That's what the research shows. You don't have to raise your hand. But the enemy in this war, the enemy has been racially defined. Not by accident, the drug war has been waged almost exclusively in poor communities of color. Even though studies have consistently shown, decade after decade, that contrary to popular belief, people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites. And that defies, of course, our basic racial stereotypes about who the drug dealers are. You know, you imagine a drug dealer, if you're like most Americans, you're probably imagining some black kid standing on the street corner with his pants sagging down. And plenty of drug dealing happens in the hood, but the studies show over and over again it happens everywhere else in America as well. Drug markets, much like American society generally, are fairly segregated by race. Black folks tend to sell to blacks, whites to whites, Latinos to each other, segregated even by class. University students sell to each other. Drug dealing happens in every community of all colors, of all classes, but those who do time for drug crime are overwhelmingly black and brown. In some states, 80 to 90% of all drug offenders sent to prison have been one race, African American. Now I know there's many people who will say, well, that's bad, but we need a drug war to get tough on them, those violent offenders, those folks in the hood, the drug kingpins. But what most people don't realize is this drug war has never been focused primarily on rooting out the violent offenders or the drug kingpins. Federal funding has flowed to those state and local law enforcement agencies that boost dramatically the sheer numbers of drug arrests. It's been a numbers game. Law enforcement agencies have been rewarded in cash for the sheer numbers of people swept into the system for drug offenses, virtually guaranteeing that law enforcement will often go out looking for the so-called low-hanging fruit, stopping, frisking, searching as many people as possible in an effort to boost their numbers. And to make matters worse, federal drug forfeiture laws allow state and local law enforcement agencies to keep for their own use up to 80% of the cash, cars, homes seized from suspected drug offenders. You don't even have to be convicted, just suspected. The police can take your cash, take your car and sell it. And that money goes back to the department, thus giving law enforcement a direct monetary interest, not in ending drug addiction or drug abuse or drug-related crime, but in the longevity of the war itself. And the results have been predictable. The overwhelming majority of those swept in to the system in the war on drugs have been convicted of relatively minor, non-violent drug offenses. 4 out of 5 convicted of simple possession, only 1 out of 5 for sales. Most people in state prison for drug offenses have no history of violence or significant selling activity. And yet, we keep doing this over and over and over again. More than 45 million people have been arrested since the drug war began for drug offenses, swept into the system, acquiring criminal records that will follow them. for life. Now, where has the U.S. Supreme Court been in all of this? Well, as a civil rights lawyer, this has been a matter of some concern to me. But far from resisting the rise of mass incarceration, the U.S. Supreme Court has granted the police license to stop, frisk, search just about anyone, anywhere, as long as they get consent. And what is consent? Consent is when a law enforcement officer sees a young man on the street and says, "Son, you put your hands up in the air, can I search you, frisk you, see if you got anything on you?" All the while the officer has one hand on his gun. The young man says, "Yeah." Well, that young man now just waived his Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, and police don't have to have a shred of evidence of criminal activity, no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion to engage in that encounter. And some might say, well, that's an inconvenience. That's an inconvenience for that young man, for sure, maybe even humiliating for him, but what does that have to do, though, with mass incarceration? Well, these individual incidents happen over and over again, thousands, hundreds of thousands of times. In fact, the New York City Police Department reported that in 1 year alone, the NYPD stopped and frisked more than 600,000 people. Overwhelmingly black and brown men. But the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled now that we can't even challenge these racial disparities in a court of law. In a series of cases beginning with McCleskey versus Kemp and Armstrong versus the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled explicitly that it doesn't matter how overwhelming the statistical evidence is, it doesn't matter how severe the racial disparities are, unless you can offer proof of conscious intentional bias tantamount to an admission by a police officer, you can't even state a claim for race discrimination in our criminal justice system today. Now that poses quite a problem for advocates myself who are trying to challenge discrimination in the system, because most of law enforcement officials today know better than to say, "Well, yes, Your Honor, I stopped him because he was black." Most law enforcement officials, like the rest of us, know better than to state our racial biases and stereotypes out loud. And more importantly, so many of the biases and stereotypes that drive law enforcement decision-making today operate on such an unconscious level that many well-meaning, well-intentioned officers can't even admit to themselves their biases and stereotypes. A well-meaning officer sees, a group of young black kids walking down the street, their pants are sagging a little bit. The officer pulls over and says, "I'm going to jump out, frisk them, search them, see what they got on them," thinking, "I'm doing my job." Same officer would see a group of young white kids walking down the street in their neighborhood and that wouldn't even cross their mind. Have those kids spread eagle on the sidewalk, up against the wall, having their car searched, torn apart. Now that officer may not be meaning those black kids any harm, but those stereotypes, those biases play themselves over and over again, hundreds of thousands of times in one city alone, adding up to enormous racial disparities that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled we can't even challenge in a court of law. Those racial profiling cases that I was bringing more than 10 years ago, most of them can't even be filed today. In this way, the U.S. Supreme Court has immunized the system of mass incarceration from judicial scrutiny and for racial bias, much in the same way that it once rallied to the defense of slavery and Jim Crow in their days. But of course, being swept into this system with little hope of challenging the bias that may have got you there is just the beginning of the odyssey for so many, because once you're swept in, as Susan Burton found, you're ushered into a parallel social universe in which the basic civil and human rights that apply to the rest no longer apply to you. For the rest of your life, you've got to check that box on employment applications. And it doesn't matter how much time has passed. It doesn't matter if your felony may have occurred a few weeks ago or 30 years ago. For the rest of your life, you've got to check that box knowing your application is likely going straight to the trash. Some people say, "Oh, come on, stop making excuses for people. When you get out of prison, life may be hard, but if you really apply yourself, if you really make an effort, if you really want to work, you can find a job. You can find a job maybe at McDonald's or something." Getting a job at McDonald's is no easy feat if you have a felony record. People say, well, maybe they could be entrepreneurs or start their own businesses or something, be creative and go out on their own. Well, most people don't have a lot of extra cash to invest in a new business when they get out of prison. But even if they did, hundreds of professional licenses are off limits to people convicted of felonies. In my state, in Ohio, you couldn't even get a license to be a barber. You've been convicted of a felony. Housing discrimination, perfectly legal, absolutely routine. Public housing projects, as well as private landlords, frequently discriminate against people with criminal records. Many people returning home from prison find that their family risks eviction in public housing if they allow them to come home. Daddy's coming home. Whole family risks eviction by allowing him to come back into the home. Public benefits, discrimination in public benefits is perfectly legal. Under federal law, you're deemed ineligible even for food stamps for the rest of your life if you've been once convicted of a drug felony. Fortunately, many states have now opted out of the federal ban on food stamps, but still the case that thousands of people can't even get food stamps, food to survive because they were once caught with drugs. What are people released from prison expected to do? Can't get a job? Even food stamps may be off limits to you? Well, apparently what we expect them to do is pay hundreds or thousands of dollars in fees, fines, court costs, accumulated back child support, which continues to accrue while you're in prison. And in a growing number of states, you're actually expected to pay back the cost of your imprisonment. And then if you're one of the lucky few who actually manages to get a job when you're released from prison, the very few, up to 100% of your wages can be garnished to pay back all those fees, fines, court costs, and accumulated back child support. What do we expect folks to do? So realistically, when we step back and view the system as a whole, not in a piecemeal fashion, but as a whole, what does the system seem designed to do? Seems designed, in my view, to send folks right back to prison, which is what, in fact, happens about 70% of the time. About 70%.
Finally, a reminder that the famous climate activist Bill McKibben will be in Hamden, Connecticut, getting the Gandhi Peace Award on Thursday, April 18th. We'll have coverage. For more information, pepeace.org. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.